I'm not suggesting that like the invention of GDP and unemployment and any of these numbers was wrong at the time. I'm suggesting that they've outlived their utility, especially commensurate with the kind of weight we put on them. And the weight we put on them is twofold. One is what happens within the kind of the professional economist policy realm, and the other is the public realm of how do we understand what's going on. The policy realm is really interesting. A little more than 5 years ago, President Obama gets up in February of 2009 in the midst of this financial crisis and somewhat of an economic implosion and says, we're going to pass the stimulus bill for $787 billion, and the result will be that it will create or save 3.5 million jobs. Now, I'm interested in this not from a partisan perspective. So let's be clear. What I'm intrigued by is not, oh, government shouldn't have done that, and no wonder that those 3.5 million jobs weren't created. Although, honestly, by saying saved, you create an inherently non-falsifiable argument because we don't get to relive the past tense, and it could well be that 3.5 million jobs were saved, but we'll never be able to prove that or disprove it, for that matter. But what I think is really interesting is what is it that allows the leader of a country who's kind of governing policy to get up and make such a specific statement about we're going to spend X and it's going to produce Y. The statement was not, things are really bad, we need to take action just like we did in the New Deal. I mean, whether you agree with that or not, the statement was not, we have an urgent situation that requires action, that requires us to staunch the bleeding by spending money, and the result will be things will not get worse nearly as quickly as they would if we don't, and they will probably get better. That would have been an honest, probably, description of we need to do something, we need to be innovative, and we need to do it now. But what is it that allows for a specific statement of spend X and a very precise number of jobs are going to be created? He didn't say 3.4, he didn't say 3.6, he said 3.5. And he didn't say it because he came up with it, he said it because there's an entire framework of economic policy making that has created formulas that go, well, if we have this thing called an economy and this thing called GDP, and if it's not producing the amount that we think with employment failing, and we spend X, based on patterns that we've observed, we can say with some degree of confidence that spending X will lead to this amount of job creation subsequently. But what's fascinating about that is if these numbers have only existed for barely 60 years, and the amount of recessions that have required that kind of spending have been, you could count on one hand. And then if you try to include examples from other countries where maybe you could count on two hands, you've created a framework that is expressed with this kind of mechanistic rigidity based on a remarkably few data points to support whether or not that is even true. My issue with that is not that we should or should not have done it. It's that we simply lack, based on what these numbers are and how long we've had them, we lack the ability to calculate outcomes with that degree of certitude. And yet we do so all the time. The Congressional Budget Office does so all the time because it has to by mandate. A mandate that, incidentally, only has existed for 20 years. There was no Congressional Budget Office before the mid-1970s, and it didn't score legislation until the passage of the Gramm-Rudman Act in the mid-1980s, and it didn't score legislation the way it currently does until the early 1990s. And yet now it's as if there was always this holy arbiter of government spending through which the calculus of if we spend X now, what will happen in the future? All of which are based on a limited number of formulas.